Thank you everyone for joining me today for part 8 of our taxpayer education series. Today's program is going to be focused on what you should do if you receive a notice from the IRS. Once again, my name is Zahra and I am the staff attorney working in the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic with the Erie County Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Project. So just a brief disclaimer, the information in this presentation is intended for educational purposes only, and it does not constitute legal advice. So just an overview of today's discussion. So we're going to start with some background information, why the IRS in general might send a notice. And we're going to go over the most common notices that taxpayers or clients reach out to our office for assistance with. So the first is the identity verification letter, proposed changes to a tax return, statutory notice of deficiency, the demand for payment. And then in the final part of the presentation, I do want to talk about the impact of COVID closures. As we've seen, at least in our office, I know that receiving any notice from the IRS is very stressful, but it has become increasingly stressful with all of the COVID closures and the impact that's had on the IRS's processing of their mail, and that really results in additional notices, or how that affects the notices that are sent to taxpayers. So in general, the IRS sends notices to taxpayers for a variety of reasons. It is very important that you open any mail that you receive from the IRS. You should read the letter and respond timely. So the following are just a few reasons why the IRS might send you a letter or a notice. We cannot list all of them in a presentation, but these are the most common notices that are sent to taxpayers. So the first is an issue with your tax return. They might send you a letter to verify your identity, or if there's missing information or forms. If there's changes to your account, or if the IRS is requesting additional information, the IRS might receive information that might impact your taxes. So if they receive information that your identity might be used for tax-related purposes, they will send you a notice just to notify you of that demand for payment. And the IRS will also send a notice if your refund has been applied to an outstanding liability. I do want to revisit the point of the importance of opening your mail from the IRS, reading the letter, and responding timely. So as you can see, the IRS sends notices for a variety of reasons. Some are a bit more intimidating than others. One common thread throughout any notice that you would receive from the IRS is that it is very important to open the letter and try to understand what the IRS is asking. And the reason for that is because you want to protect your rights down the line. So something that might start off as a minor issue, the IRS is missing information. So for example, if you file a tax return and you claim the child tax credit, there's a specific form that should accompany that when you file your tax return, and that could be missing. And so what starts off as a simple request for that form might then spiral into the IRS disallowing that credit because they didn't receive the information from you. And so although it is very intimidating, and I'm fairly certain that when you receive something from the IRS, you will know that it's from the IRS. And so I know that a lot of people are just too scared to open it at that point, but that will not do anybody any good. So please make sure that you do open any mail from the IRS, read the letter. If you don't understand it, because I do know that the notices can be very overwhelming sometimes, please do not hesitate to reach out to our LITC or any tax professional to make sure that you understand what's going on, and then so that we can respond effectively and timely. So one of the most common letters that we've seen over the past year is the identity verification letter. This is most commonly sent in response to or at least we've seen a surge really because of taxpayers using the non-filer portal, and so there has been unfortunately a surge in some fraudulent returns being filed, and so the IRS has been sending out a lot more of the identity verification letters. When you receive this letter, you will need to verify your identity through the identity verification service online. If you're unable to do that, you can also call the identity verification hotline and try to verify your identity that way. In order to do that, you will need the following information. So the letter that you received, it would be the 5071C or the 6331C. you will need the tax return for the year on the notice. So whenever you receive a notice from the IRS, in the top right corner, it will include your first and last name, your taxpayer identification number, and then it will say tax year. So that really means the tax year that the notice is regarding. So you will need that information, a prior year's tax return, as well as supporting documentation from the return. I will also say we have seen a lot of clients who've been unable to verify their identity online as well as through the hotline. Sometimes it's confusion about if they used, for example, the non-filer portal, and that has often resulted in them giving the wrong answer. So you can also schedule an appointment with the IRS in their Buffalo office to verify your identity that way. However, you must go through these avenues first, and if you're unable to do it that way, you can then request an appointment, or you could also reach out to the taxpayer advocate service or reach out to our office for assistance. So changes to your tax return. If the IRS receives information which conflicts with the information that you included on your tax return, the IRS will send you proposed changes to your a notice proposing changes to your tax return. This doesn't mean that your tax return is being audited. It only means that there's a discrepancy that needs to be resolved. So you should review the proposed changes and compare them with the information that you have on your tax return. If you agree, you should check the box and return it to the IRS. If you disagree with some of the changes or all of the proposed changes, you should check the box disagreeing and explain why you disagree. At that point, you should return the response form with the supporting documentation for your position to the address or the fax number provided. One example of this is if you, for example, if you have a credit card liability and the credit card company decides to cancel that debt. So according to tax law, that would constitute taxable income. But a lot of times we find that taxpayers are unaware that the debt has actually been canceled, and so they don't include that on their tax return. There are exceptions to that. So if the taxpayer is insolvent at the time of discharge of the credit card debt, it's at that point, it's not taxable, but this is a perfect example of communicating that information to the IRS. So, if you recognize that credit card debt and you weren't aware that it was that it's been discharged, you'd want to follow up to make sure that it's been discharged. And then at that point, if you are not eligible for any of the exceptions, you could agree and return it to the IRS. Or if you don't recognize that income, or if you believe that you are eligible for one of the exceptions, then you can provide the supporting documentation, state that you disagree on the response form, and then provide the supporting documentation and return that to the address or the fax number provided on the notice. I just want to reiterate that it's very important that you respond by the deadline indicated on the notice. If you do not have the information readily available, if you need more than 30 days, you should call the number on the notice to explain your circumstances and request additional time. More often than not, the IRS will grant you additional time to gather your documents. So what happens if you fail to respond, or if the IRS disagrees with your explanation? Then the IRS will the IRS will send you a statutory notice of deficiency. And this is often referred to as the 90-day letter. And I'll explain shortly why it's referred to as the 90-day letter. But when you receive the statutory notice of deficiency, it will explain the proposed changes. You will receive a report of income tax examination, an explanation of items, and a response sheet. So as I mentioned, it is often referred to as the 90-day letter. And the reason for that is because the statutory notice of deficiency gives you the right to challenge the changes in US tax court. And you have to do that within 90 days. Or if the letter is addressed outside of the United States, then you have 150 days. It's very important that you do respond within that time frame, because if you're not able to respond, or if you don't respond and the tax court doesn't receive your petition, then really you forfeit your ability to fight the issue at tax court. It's a jurisdictional issue, so the 90-day deadline is very important. So now what happens after the assessment of the tax? So the IRS sent you a notice proposing changes. You may have provided supporting documentation, they have disagreed, or it's at the point now where the IRS has assessed this additional tax, or even if you file a tax return, that would constitute an assessment, but you haven't paid. So an assessment really means that the liability is now on the books. But if you haven't paid, then the IRS will begin collection action. So the first thing they'll send you is a notice and demand for payment. This is made within 60 days of the assessment. And then you'll begin to get reminder notices reminding you that you still have a balance owing to the IRS. And then finally comes the final notice. At this point, this means that the matter has been referred to the automated collection system or a revenue officer. And the automated collection system or the revenue officer will attempt to locate levy sources, and they will contact the taxpayer to arrange payment. So at this point, we begin to see garnishment of wages. There might be a levy on your Social Security benefits. It is important to note that the IRS must provide notice of the levy, which gives the taxpayer the opportunity for a collection due process hearing. This is very important to note because, for example, if you're unable to pay, this is one avenue where you can make that argument. Sorry. On the same line of the collection notices, these letters tend to be very intimidating because in big, bold writing at the top, it says amount due immediately. If you agree that you owe the amount, there's usually three categories. I mean, either you're able to pay the full amount, you might be able to pay a portion of the amount, but not the full amount, or you're facing severe economic hardship and you can't pay anything. I'd like to go through what you should do in each circumstance. So if you agree that you owe the amount and you have the means to pay the full amount, you should follow the instructions and submit payment to the IRS. This will avoid the accrual of penalties and interest. As we've seen, if at certain points, what starts off as a smaller balance with the accrual of penalties and interest, they can be very steep. And at certain times, the penalties and interest can then be more than the initial liability. So if you do have the means to pay for the full amount, I highly recommend that you do that, once you receive the notice and demand for payment. If you can't pay the full amount, but you can pay a portion of it, you can request an installment agreement to make payments over a fixed period of time. And then finally, if you're facing severe economic hardship, you can contact the IRS to request currently not collectible status. It's important to note currently not collectible status does not resolve the entire liability. Really what this means is that the IRS will not be proactively pursuing collection activities against you. You would still get an annual reminder telling you that the amount is still due and it continues to accrue penalties and interest. And also it's important to note that the IRS will apply any refund that you're entitled to the liability that you owe. So it's usually the first step in resolving the tax debt, depending on how long the IRS has to collect. It might be the last step, but it is one of the first and most important steps that we take on behalf of our clients. And finally, I want to talk about the effects of the COVID-19 closures. So as you're probably aware, the IRS is still dealing with a large backlog, particularly in processing paper items. So this includes paper returns, supporting documentations. If the IRS sent you a notice requesting additional documentation and you sent in that documentation, we are seeing that there has been a surge in notices being sent to the taxpayer prematurely, and there have been premature assessments against the taxpayer. You should still, again, open your mail from the IRS, read the letter, and respond every single time. I think one thing that I forgot to mention, in the first couple of slides is that when you do respond, we highly recommend that you send your correspondence certified so that you have proof of mailing and proof of your response. And oftentimes it will catch up. So if you provide the supporting documentation, what I mean by the notice being sent prematurely is sometimes the IRS will not have had time to actually look through your documentation. And so you'll get the second notice saying that, we've disallowed, not you will, but you might get a second notice saying that we've disallowed this credit because you did not provide supporting documentation. This can be very stressful, but unfortunately, it's really just the result of the IRS working to process the large backlog that they're dealing with right now. You should still respond to all of the notices. We've had clients who have received demand for payment, even though they timely paid off their tax liability, they still received a demand for payment, 2 months after making the payment. Luckily, they had proof of the payment and were able to provide that supporting documentation, but they actually got at least 2 notices, after their initial response. So it's very important to respond, even though it can be very frustrating, especially as you know that you've paid the amount, especially if you've seen that the amount has been taken out of your bank account, or if you paid via credit card or what have you. It can be very frustrating, but unfortunately, this is just part of the IRS trying to work through the backlog that they're dealing with right now. So you're not alone. It's very frustrating, very intimidating, but you're not alone, and it's a common issue that we're seeing. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat box. So I just want to reiterate that really the purpose of this presentation was just to give you an overview. By no means, sorry, I apologize. So the purpose of this presentation was really just to give an overview. And if you have any questions or concerns, or if you receive a notice that you are uncertain, what it means, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. We are here to help. This is our contact information. So yeah, don't be shy. Thank you so much. Have a great day.